Hello friends. So continuing with the subject social pharmacy, in that last time we have covered artificial ripening, its effects, and then use of pesticides. Now today the next topic is genetically modified food. Nowadays whatever the food articles are there, they are available in the market, maybe vegetables, maybe fruits, so they are getting genetically modified. Now first we must understand ki what are GM foods. We must know the long form also of GMF, that is genetically modified food. Now genes play important role in human beings also. We know we have got genetic coding, isn't it? So as we have genetic coding, similarly plants and animals also have their own genes, and these genes decide the color, the height of the plant, isn't it, and all other characteristics. Whatever the characteristics we have, so they are dependent on whatever the genes we receive from parents, isn't it? Whatever you people have characteristics, so that is the result of the genetic coding that you receive from the parents. Now same genetic modification can be done in plants, in vegetables. How that is done, what is the meaning, what is the definition, what are the benefits, and what are the disadvantages, all that we are going to discuss today, isn't it? Now a scientist can genetically modify a plant, isn't it? They can insert a foreign gene in the plant's own genes, isn't it? Now first we will see the meaning of this. What are genetically modified foods? Now genetically modified foods, or we can call GM foods also, they are genetically engineered foods. They are produced from organisms that have had changes introduced into their DNA using methods of genetic engineering. So here the genetic modification is done into the food material, isn't it? So as you can see inside the slide, isn't it, maybe vegetables, maybe fruits, isn't it? So the changes are done, the genes are inserted, other DNA from one organism can be inserted into the other organism, isn't it? This you have to understand. We will try to understand the meaning of GM foods by referring first few slides, isn't it? So this genetically modified foods, they involve insertion of DNA from one organism into another, isn't it? Or there is modification of organism's DNA in order to achieve a desired modification, or we can say trait also, isn't it? Now you can see in this slide the Arctic fish DNA, isn't it, which is combined with strawberry, isn't it? And then we get the strawberry which is resistant to frost, isn't it? So the DNA of one organism can be inserted in another. This is one technique. Or whatever the existing food material is there, vegetable is there or fruit is there, so the DNA of that particular food material, vegetable or fruit, is modified to get some new species, isn't it? That we call a GM food. Now, here there are some of the important steps which are involved in the modification. Whatever the genetic modification is done, isn't it? So, these are certain important steps, isn't it? First, an interesting gene, isn't it, from a donor organism, isn't it, which is isolated and it is then inserted. So first we have to identify that which gene we have to insert, isn't it, in a fruit material or vegetable material. Then it is to be isolated and gene is inserted, that we call a genetic construction. Now this genetic construction will give rise to multiplication. It will multiply, isn't it? Now the genes are transferred, as we can see, and the plant regeneration is done, and then this we can see how the growth of a plant is taking place due to the result of that particular gene which is inserted into the plant, isn't it? Again, we will try to understand what are these GM foods, isn't it? Now, these genetically modified foods are foods derived from genetically modified organisms. Now, these organisms can be defined as organisms in which genetic material, that is mainly DNA, has been altered in a way that does not occur naturally. So here one thing you have to keep in mind, that whatever this is done artificially, isn't it? Whatever the modification is taking place of DNA, that is not a natural process, isn't it? Artificially, the scientists, you can say, are attempting to develop a new species, isn't it, of food material, maybe vegetable or fruit, so that we must have the additional you can say nutritional value, isn't it, to fight against malnutrition or whatever the benefits we will discuss in the next slide. Now this is done by altering the existing section of DNA or adding new gene altogether. So as I said earlier, genetically modified foods, either whatever the existing DNA is there, that is modified, that is altered, that is changed, or we can totally, you can say, replace or introduce new gene into the fruit material or whatever the vegetable is there or food article is there. Now there are many technologies which are named. Some of the names I will give you as they appear on the slide, isn't it? Like modern biotechnology we can also call gene technology, or we can call recombinant DNA technology or genetic engineering. It is one and the same. All of you have to remember the name of these techniques. These are some of the important names which are given. Again I repeat, the technology can be called modern biotechnology or gene technology or recombinant DNA technology or genetic engineering. Now this allows selected individual genes to be transferred from one organism to another, isn't it? And also between non-related species also, isn't it? Now, what is the need of genetic modified foods, isn't it? So, the major reason behind this is the population. So, as the population is growing, we have to fulfill the demand, whatever the demand is there of the vegetables, fruits, whatever the food articles are there, isn't it? Now, naturally, if one goes for the growth of the crops, so the growth of the crops naturally is very less, isn't it? It requires sufficient time period, isn't it, for any material to grow up, isn't it? And that also will not grow up in the large quantity, but to fulfill the demand of the existing population, isn't it? This newer technique is used nowadays, isn't it? And the other reason is the agricultural land which is nowadays decreasing, isn't it? So, in a less agricultural land, more yield, more crops, more percentage, more output can be obtained by this newer technique, isn't it? So, this is also necessary GM foods to manage the food deficiency in world market. Now, common genetically modified foods, as I said, this is possible, isn't it? Insertion of newer gene or modification of the genetic code is possible in vegetables, fruits, isn't it? Nowadays we are getting so many fruits which are seedless, isn't it? So that is the result of this, whatever the newer recombinant technology is there. Now same thing is possible in meat also, cattle's, poultry farm, isn't it? Nowadays there is a huge production of eggs, isn't it? Then rice, milk from GM cows, isn't it? Cheese, foods from KFC and McDonald's also are genetically modified foods. Now first we will talk about the benefits of genetically modified foods. So benefits include, first of all, decreased use of pesticides. Now when we go for genetically modified foods, so comparatively the pesticides required are very less, isn't it? So when the food articles come in contact with pesticides, isn't it, that is also a harmful effect on our health. So here the first benefit is decreased use of pesticides. Then more income. So whatever these articles are there, they provide more income to the persons who are involved in their production, isn't it? Then less deforestation. So when naturally we have to grow the crops, isn't it? So there the land area for agricultural purpose required is more, isn't it? But when we are following this artificial technique, isn't it? So in that the land required will be less, isn't it? In less acres of land area, more production is possible, and therefore there is no need to finish the forest, isn't it, and go for deforestation, isn't it? That is another benefit. Then decrease in global warming. So nowadays whatever the climatic changes are there, isn't it? So that also the percentage decreases. Then insect resistance, isn't it? So insects which are responsible for the destruction of the crops, isn't it? So that also reduces insects are not able to destroy these genetically modified whatever the crops are there. Some other more benefits of these GM foods. So as you can see in the slide that the shelf life of these type of foods is more, isn't it? You can see in the slide the ordinary tomatoes and the GM tomatoes, isn't it? So there are three sets of tomatoes you can see, isn't it? The ordinary control tomatoes, extremely left, which are in the left side, they become soft and they may decay after some time. While texture of gene silenced tomato, that is the genetically modified, remains intact for up to 45 days, isn't it? So that is the meaning of shelf life. The shelf life of ordinary tomatoes is less, isn't it? For ordinary tomatoes, it is 10 days. The tomatoes which are in between, it is 20 days. And in right hand side, they have got 45 days shelf life. Crops are stronger enough, isn't it? That is another benefit of GM foods. Larger production is possible in less area. Then decrease in food prices. So when the crops are in large amount, isn't it? So automatically the price also is less, isn't it? And that may be economic for the people. More nutritious food. So by this technique, one can develop more nutritious food also, isn't it? These are some of the important benefits which are associated with the GM crops, isn't it? So desired change can be achieved in these food articles, isn't it? Growth is faster, isn't it? And the agricultural performance is increased, improved, isn't it? Less labor input is there, isn't it? Pesticides used are reduced, isn't it? So, as I said, and it is given in the slide, more nutritious food means कि whatever the nutritional value is there, that is also improved. In this case, so vitamin A contained in rice also can be improved, isn't it? And this is more important in the countries where there are higher percentage of the children suffering from blindness, isn't it? So to prevent blindness in such children's, isn't it? This is more common in Southeast Asia countries, isn't it? Now on the same time, there is positive environmental impact of genetically modified organisms कि they are useful to fight hunger and malnutrition around the world, isn't it? Now these are also important. Why? Because in some of the countries there is a problem of soil salinity, isn't it? Now due to the soil salinity, what is happening is the growth of the crops is very less, isn't it? You can see in the slide the soil is appearing white, isn't it? And this is because of the excessive salt. Now if such type of soil is there, so there the growth of the crops will be less, isn't it? There will be no higher remarkable percentage of the crops, isn't it? So this is called soil salinity. This problem also can be tackled by the GM foods. Then use the genes of salt tolerant plant species, example mangrove, in the agricultural crops, isn't it? So where there is a problem of soil salinity, there the other alternative is कि one can go for the genes which are salt tolerant, isn't it? And here one of the example is mangrove. So where there is no any effect of the soil, whatever the may be soil, isn't it? So there will be the growth of the crops. Then creating sustainability through genetically modified organisms. Now, the genetic engineering of plants has a potential to provide edible plant vaccines, isn't it? So, for example, banana and potato, isn't it? So see how the eatables, maybe vegetables, maybe fruits, how they are sustained, how they are preserved by using the artificial or whatever the genetical modifications are there. Now till now we have discussed about the benefits of GM foods, isn't it? Now we will see some of the disadvantages and risk factors which are involved with the genetically modified crops. First we will discuss about the health effects. Now very first here it is allergic reactions, isn't it? So there are chances that there may be some of the allergies associated with any system of the body or skin, isn't it? This is the drawback of genetically modified food. Other is less effective antibiotics. So if we are continuously using these type of foods in future or in present, so nowadays you see that so many diseases are there, and when the doctor prescribes antibiotics, isn't it, to fight the infection, so those antibiotics are less effective, isn't it? That is another disadvantage associated with GM foods. Then higher risk of toxicity. So more or less these type of food articles, they are not natural, and therefore they are also having harmful effects on our health, isn't it? They are not safe enough for our body, although they have nutritional value, all nutrients are present, no doubt. But being it is a chemical, being they are artificial, so there is a risk of toxicity. Then, as we have seen positive impact on environment, so some negative impact is also there. isn't it, on environment. Now, very first point is that they are not 100% environmentally friendly, genetically modified foods, isn't it? Other is कि they are endangering many species of extinction. Endangering many species of extinction. As I said, कि in environment other species are also present, isn't it? So these GM foods, they are harmful to other species also. For example, butterflies, isn't it? So the mortality rate of these monarch butterflies, isn't it, there is high due to biopesticide pollens, isn't it, that was created by genetically modified corn. So these GM foods, they may create some undesired pest also, isn't it? The growth of the pest may result, isn't it? And on the same time, the pollens which are grown, isn't it, they get created automatically due to these genetically modified foods, isn't it? And they are having harmful effect, negative effect on the environment and as well as the other environmental species. Then there are certain possible risks, isn't it? Now, insects may provide resistance to pesticide producing GM crops, isn't it? So, there may be resistance. Then herbicide tolerant crops may cross pollinate weeds resulting in super weeds, isn't it? Now whatever these GM crops are there, when their growth is initiated, on the same time there may be the growth of other tolerant crops also, other weeds also, which are not beneficial for us, and they may grow into the super weeds. They may grow into the super weeds. Certain gene products may be allergens, thus causing harm to human health, isn't it? So, allergy we have talked, allergic reactions we have discussed. So, that is one of the major risk factor, isn't it, associated with these GM foods. There may be unintended harm to wildlife and beneficial insects. So as I said, कि negative impact on environment, कि this butterfly we are seeing, so the mortality rate of this butterfly is high due to this GM foods, as well as other also organisms which are beneficial organisms in the environment, isn't it? They also may be destroyed, isn't it? There is a harm to the wildlife also due to this genetically modified foods. So allergic reactions we have discussed, isn't it, which are associated with the GM foods. In our country, if we talk, so there are so many laborers which are working in the fields, like picking up cotton, isn't it, and working in cotton ginning factories, isn't it? So they are you can say easily targeted by the allergic reactions while handling BT cotton, isn't it? So BT cotton is a genetically modified cotton. Now this is not possible with the non-BT varieties, or other varieties of the cotton are there. So the laborers, when they are collecting or picking up the other varieties, they don't suffer from the allergic reactions, isn't it? Now hospital records also show that the victims of itching have increased at a large amount within the years, isn't it? And all are related to the BT cotton farming. So next slide, this shows you the varieties of the genetically modified crops in our country. In our country, mainly cotton and brinjal, isn't it? BT cotton and BT brinjal you can see which are involved, and these are genetically modified, isn't it? And the possible risks factors also we have discussed, isn't it? So finally, uh, the conclusion is that in our country the pressure is there of this biotechnology technique nowadays, isn't it? Recombinant technology, and these industries are pressurizing to allow GM crops to legalize this, isn't it? The agricultural scientists also, they are using GM crop as a tool to ensure livelihood for the past 3 decades. Why? Because the growth is in large amount, isn't it? Benefits are there, income is there, isn't it? Therefore they are also favoring GM crops. Now GM crops in our country should be banned. Why? Because they are responsible for allergic reactions. It is an unnatural food, isn't it? And specifically the BT brinjal, BT tomato should be banned. Now genetically modified non-food crops can only be allowed in India under certain conditions, isn't it? For example, BT cotton. So point in saying is that the foods which are eatables, isn't it? Try to understand that the eatable foods like brinjal, tomato, vegetables, fruits which are prepared by this technique, genetically modification, they must be banned. Why? Because they have got possible major risk factors on our health, isn't it? Okay. So that is all about the GM foods. Go through this slide. If you are not understanding, try to listen twice, thrice, and complete your notes through these slides only. So in between you can pause the lecture and you can complete by referring these slides and complete your notes, isn't it? Thank you.